Hello YouTubers out there, this is Jerry at the Movies. On last week's show, I said I would interview this week Leslie Hoffman, a stunt woman who I had the privilege of interviewing. But I decided to do a slightly different topic this week. And that comes in regards to a recent review of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, as reviewed by Michael-Phillips. Now, the issue is this. I've been writing film reviews for a very long time, and professionally and as an amateur. And one of the most important aspects of film criticism is that when you review a movie, you're reviewing the content of the film, and as well as the actors, direction, cinematography, the plot, the story, the effects, whatever it is that you can perceive as cinematic techniques in a movie. That's what you review. You can also, in a sense, deal with other subjects that relate to the film, whatever they may be. So if you're reviewing a political film and it deals with the times that we live in, and as a reflection of those times, you can review it in those terms. You could say, well, this is what I think about the political situation that is either a microcosm or a macrocosm of what's really being featured or depicted in a film. But what you don't want to do when you review a film, I think, is review outside the source of the picture and look at things that have really no bearing whatsoever on the film. So, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Part 2 was reviewed on Thursday, July 14th. And in Michael-Phillips' review, Michael-Phillips being a film critic for the Chicago Tribune, and also was one of the panelists on At the Movies before these two other film critics took over. And in it he makes this comment, and I quote, "The first Harry Potter movie opened in the U.S. 2 months and 5 days after 9/11. All that first movie had to do was show up, not stink, and offer a welcome escape from the sight of the World Trade Center collapsing over and over again." In Deathly Hallows 2, a major character transforms into ash, floating in a gray, smudgy sky. It is an image inspired by an unthinkable without 9/11. Now, that part may be true. I think that's probably an okay written gesture to make, the last part about the ash. But the first part, really, it felt wrong to say that. First of all, I had forgotten that I knew Harry Potter, the first one, the Sorcerer's Stone, opened in 2001. But the mere fact that it opened 2 months and 5 days after 9/11 escapes me, because I didn't remember that at all. Nevertheless, when I first saw Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, my first thought when I entered the theater to watch this movie was, I hope this offers respite from the trauma of 9/11. At the time I lived in New Jersey, so I wasn't far from New York City and Ground Zero. But that has no relation at all to the film. So I point to something else Michael-Phillips wrote as well. This was a few months back, and this was a review for The Green Hornet. And Michael-Phillips wrote, and I quote, "In the wake of last weekend's massacre in Tucson, relating to Congresswoman Giffords, who was shot in the head, it's suddenly, temporarily, a little harder to laugh off scene after scene of obsessive gun fetishization and mass slaughter in a superhero vigilante lark." Now, the rest of the review deals with the fact that he thought it was too over-the-top of violence in a film that is PG-13 and could almost be an R. That's a whole other subject. But the fact of the matter is that whatever is happening in the world has little or no reflection in a movie, unless the movie itself is a reflection or deals with the events taking place in the world, whatever they may be. I mean, I think that if a movie, a TV movie, let's say, or even just a regular film, a theatrical release, dealt with a congressman or woman who was being threatened by some sort of a vigilante or vigilante group and is shot at, and this film opens within a week after the tragedy in Tucson, they probably would actually delay the film, which often is what happens whenever you have a film that reflects something a little too accurately or it's too topical a subject. They tend to delay the film. And actually, in reference to 9/11, if you recall, after 9/11, there were a lot of movies that were out that had absolutely nothing to do with terrorism except one, and that was Collateral Damage, with Arnold Schwarzenegger as a fireman a firefighter who fights terrorists, Arabian terrorists, or of Arabian descent. And that film was to come out, I believe, in October of 2001, if I'm not mistaken. So that was, of course, shortly after 9/11, and was delayed and came out in February or March of 2002. Now, but the movies that opened were films like Hardball, which was a sports movie with Keanu Reeves, Legally Blonde, which I believe was re-released briefly after 9/11. The Score, which I also believe either was still in release or was re-released, with Robert De Niro, Marlon Brando. That was a heist drama. In fact, there was even a movie called Heist that came out later that year, starring Gene Hackman and Danny DeVito. So the point is that these movies didn't reflect the times. They just reflected something pre-9/11, if you like. But certainly had nothing to do with 9/11. So again, you know, those movies offered an escape, and perhaps I could safely say that people needed an escape. But you can't review a movie in terms of something that's happened that has nothing to do with the subject of the movie. And for that reason, I point to something that few people probably even remember, that Bruce-Willis said shortly after the release of Die Hard with a Vengeance. Now, if you remember, Die Hard with a Vengeance came out in 1995, and that was approximately not too long after the Oklahoma City bombing, which was a real tragedy. And this is something Bruce-Willis said during press interviews about Die Hard with a Vengeance, and something that Michael-Phillips probably could learn a thing or two. That is, Bruce-Willis requested that he not be asked about Oklahoma City to the press, because he didn't want to trivialize that tragedy by discussing it in terms of this movie. So, the bottom line is that unless a film really actually reflects some trauma, some incident that occurred, it would be trivializing the Green Hornet to discuss it in terms of the Gifford near tragedy, because of course she's living, thankfully, and my blessings to her and her family, but that has nothing to do with the Green Hornet. It has nothing to do with the Fast and Furious, has nothing to do with any of these action movies that have wall-to-wall type of violence, because more often than not, the violence in those pictures is cartoonish and purposely over the top, and therefore doesn't reflect real tragedy. So I am not trying to really review a critic. That's not something I do, but I like to call out Michael-Phillips on what he said, because I think that sometimes you have to let bygones be the bygones, and 9/11 has nothing to do with Harry Potter. Perhaps the books that have come out since, and I haven't read them, so I can't comment. I know J.K. Rowling has purposely inserted aspects that relate to the Bush administration in her books, and perhaps in some way to 9/11, but not with the initial novel, obviously. And thus, when the film came out, it wasn't made with any pretext involving 9/11. So do not exploit real tragedy in your review of a movie that has nothing to do with the tragedy itself. And I think that's an important lesson to learn. Now, I might have been guilty one or two times in the past of saying things like my review of Passion of the Christ. I spent more time, I think, in my review, in hindsight, discussing the movie in terms of the anti-Semitic response by people of the film instead of the film itself. But by that same regard, I don't review a film in terms of a tragedy that has just occurred and think that in some way I have to incorporate it into a review when the movie itself has nothing to do with the tragedy. So, enough said about that. And this is Jerry at the Movies, and hopefully next time I'll talk about Leslie Hoffman, former stunt woman, and the problems that she has been encountering with SAG, specifically being blacklisted by SAG. And that's a big subject right there. So until then, I'm Jerry at the Movies, signing off.